Hello everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. A living nightmare. This is how the UN rights chief described the situation in Gaza. The Israel-Hamas war continues to heat up in Gaza City, with the Israel Defense Forces destroying 130 Hamas tunnels. As the humanitarian crisis deepens in the region, the U.S. had been pushing Israel for a humanitarian pause, which was rebuked by Israeli President. Netanyahu even shared his vision for a post-war Gaza, saying Israel will, for an indefinite period, have the overall security responsibility. This a divergent view than that of the U.S., which believes Israel's reoccupation of Gaza would not be good. How is the war developing and how is it expected to develop? For this, we invited Professor Park Hyon-do from Sogang University. Welcome, Professor Park.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Professor Scott Walker from United Arab Emirates University. Good to see you, Professor Walker.
Hello, thank you.
Hello, nice to see you. Now, Professor Walker, first question to you. So it has already been 1 month since the conflict began, and I just saw a report saying Hamas lost control of northern Gaza. Could you tell us the current situation in the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, I saw your report as well, and it's kind of interesting because they'd been told to evacuate northern Gaza. That was a warning from the Israelis, and then now they're using that as kind of a political tool, saying, see, Hamas is losing control of northern Gaza. I don't quite get what that statement means. The people have been told to flee northern Gaza towards the south, and that's pretty much their only choice at the moment. There's nowhere else for them to go. I think the news came out that there were about 15,000 people that evacuated just yesterday, and several thousand more in the several days before that. So we are facing a humanitarian crisis, but we don't exactly know exactly how bad it is. What we do know is that from what we can tell, there's not much in terms of food and aid coming in. The reports that they're just living on a little bit of UN granted flour every day that they can turn into a few pieces of bread each. And so obviously now powers are going out, hospital generators aren't working. So we are facing, without knowing exactly the degree or scope, we're finding out that this is probably going to be very bad. And what bothers me is not so much what's happened, but that there seems to be absolutely no end in sight to it. If this were the end, we might be able to get our heads around it, but it's obviously going to probably without some sort of change go on for weeks, months, because Israel said we're not leaving until we've completely dismantled Hamas, and nobody has any idea how long that's going to take. So there's a lot of pessimism right now with what's happening. So.
Right, I cannot agree more. There are so many pessimistic views right now. Professor Park, war is tragic in that it displaces many civilians and causes so many tragic deaths. And this conflict is not an exception in that. It is said the death toll in the besieged Palestinian territory has surpassed 10,000. How serious is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
First of all, I'm very ashamed of talking about it right now because, including me, the whole world is focusing on what is going on in terms of the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. But as a matter of fact, the people in Gaza have been subjected to the humanitarian issues for a long time, at least more than 16 years, when Gaza was entirely actually closed by the Israel. And the challenges are huge. For example, limited access to basic necessities like clean water and electricity and healthcare and education, to say nothing of high levels of unemployment and poverty. And the situation has been exacerbated by political and military conflicts, including the current Israeli-Hamas war. So humanitarian organizations have consistently, for many decades, I would say, raised concerns about the living conditions and access to essential services for the people in Gaza, but the world did not listen to that plea from the humanitarian organization. So that's what I mean by I'm very ashamed of talking about this right at this moment.
Right, I see. So humanitarian crisis has been there for a long time in Gaza Strip, and now with the war, it is being very much aggregated. I know what you mean. Now, Professor Walker, and thus the U.S. President Joe Biden pressed Israeli Prime Minister to agree to humanitarian pauses. What is Washington's intention behind this?
Well, your question is, your guess is as good as mine. But let me start by saying I must compliment Professor Park because he's absolutely right. Where was your TV station in the 2014 war? I don't know, maybe you were covering it, but it wasn't being covered in the previous months leading up to this. And now it's news, but why only now when this has been happening to people in Palestine or in Gaza specifically for a long time? I'd love to be able to explain exactly what Biden's purpose is. He, on the one hand, wants to show he's giving complete support to Israel to handle this situation in the way that they see fit. But at the same time, he wants to show that he is a humanitarian carrying on some of the American humanitarian beliefs and traditions and policies. But you can see there's a gap because right now, the current president, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is not interested in making changes until such time as they've eliminated Hamas. So with very limited windows is all the Israelis have agreed to. And I don't know how realistic it is to get aid in with an hour or hour and a half stoppage of the shelling. So the U.S. Is of two minds with this. There's no question about it. They want to help their close ally in the region, but they're simply not really able to put that direct control onto the Israelis the way they want to. So I'm not sure what will happen without the U.S. starting to use some sort of sticks in terms of some sort of limits or punishment to the support they're giving. I think Israel's going to keep continuing to do this, barring a few little symbolic or small gestures to allow little bits of aid in. But I think I don't see any kind of change based on American policy. They're going to kind of support humanitarianism, but in reality, they're going to be supporting their ally for the most part until this operation is over, or until something else happens to change America's mind on this topic and make them come down on Israel harder.
All right, I see your point, Professor. Well, as Professor Walker already pointed out, Professor Park, despite such pressure, the Israeli Prime Minister once again rejected the idea of a general ceasefire in Gaza unless hostages are released. However, he suggested an openness to tactical little pauses in fighting. What do his words hint at?
I think I need to reiterate his saying. He said that there will be no ceasefire, a general ceasefire in Gaza without the release of our hostages. And he said, as far as tactical little pauses, an hour here, an hour there, we've had them before, which means that he cannot agree with any ceasefire, any whatsoever. But he can let actually the military stop the operation for an hour or two in order for the humanitarian aid to arrive in Gaza. Only in limited quantity. You know, what is going on right now in Gaza, according to the humanitarian and aid groups, they need at least 100 number of trucks full of the aid, actually the food and all other things. But right now, sometimes 20, oftentimes less than 20 is coming in, which means that the lifeline is cut. The people in Gaza is entirely close to the outside the help, and they are in a sense dying. So that's why there is a huge, actually, the rising concerns of the people over the health and the security of the Gaza people, and we need to put more our aids into the region. So there is a kind of pressure on the Israeli government. That's one of the reasons why the Prime Minister Netanyahu say, well, he can make a kind of a tactical pauses. That's all.
All right, I see. So if I understood it correctly, Professor Park, so he is just allowing a few hours of ceasefire for the humanitarian assistance to go into the Gaza Strip, right?
Yeah,
Right,
only
right.
few hours if there is any need, but not more than that. So actually, he said that the Israel had allowed that kind of the ceasefire, but he does not believe in any general ceasefire because it is a humiliation on the face of the Israelis. Israel is already greatly humiliated by the surprise attack. Now he tried to root out the evil Hamas. So in order to root out the evil Hamas, they cannot stop. But because there are a lot of pressures from the international community, he can agree to a 1 or 2 hour stopping of the operation. That's all.
All right, I see your point. Now, such words that was actually from an interview with the U.S. local media outlet. And during the same interview, Professor Walker, Netanyahu said Israel would take responsibility for security in Gaza for an indefinite period as well. What does this suggest?
Well, honestly, I've tried to, I saw your question in advance, so I tried to look and figure it out, and it's really unclear exactly what that could mean. For Netanyahu, I would think it would mean some sort of strict military occupation until the situation's completely been handled. But I think for other people, such as the UN and other groups, they'd want to see some sort of long-term transition towards some sort of managing their affairs to some degree, the Palestinians managing their affairs by themselves. But what I found interesting was the leader of the opposition, Mr. Lapid, he has thought about this, and he says, if we are going to be in Gaza, we're not going to allow the Palestinian Authority to operate, then we have to go and directly take control and manage the schools, the sanitation, the hospitals, everything ourselves, because you can't just have a situation where nobody is running the country. Now, I think in terms of Netanyahu, his policies are very risky because basically, to some degree, he equates even Fatah, the group that runs the West Bank, with the more radical Hamas people. And if that's true, or even if you just take out Hamas people alone, they're the people who've been running Gaza for some time now. So if they're replaced, who you replace them with, you will have people running the place who don't have any experience, knowledge in this particular area. So it's really unclear, particularly if you really get rid of the Palestinian Authority completely, or get rid of Hamas completely, because they're running certain aspects of the country. And so what will you do is very unclear. And whatever will happen is going to it's going to make somebody very unhappy, because it's either going to allow some people in Hamas to still stay in power, or people associated with Hamas, or it's going to have directly Israeli control, or there's been a suggestion by people of having some sort of international body come in and administer Gaza and or the West Bank. But these are all just suggestions right now. There's not, to my knowledge, a direct precedent for that kind of thing. So honestly, I don't know, particularly if Netanyahu stays in power, which he might not. I don't know where this will go. It might be a little bit easier if the opposition comes in and is a little bit more amenable to a little bit more flexibility. But honestly, perhaps your other guest has some ideas, because it's very confusing at the moment what will happen.
Right. I see your point. It is very unclear, but some really say that this kind of shows Israel's, aspiration to reoccupy the Gaza Strip. And as far as I know, Professor Park, Israel already had experience of occupying Gaza from 1967 until 2005. How were Palestinians affected by Israel's occupation then?
Well, Israeli forces took the Gaza Strip in 1967 war from Egypt, and it had occupied the land until 2005. Big difference is that at the time there were Jewish settlers, Israeli settlers living inside the Gaza Strip and protected by the Israeli forces. So there were a lot of actually the protests against the occupation forces and also the settlers. And settlers also had a lot of problems with the Palestinian people. So eventually, 2005, the Israeli government decided to pull out completely from the Gaza and taking out all the settlers. and it was given to, in a sense, ever since 2006, according to the election result, Hamas took over the control of the Gaza. And in a sense, the Israeli government was made a kind of I don't think the Israeli government cannot actually deny the scheme that they had in mind at the time. If the Hamas is occupying the land, then they can call it enemy territory. So it is much easier for Israel to control of the Gaza by attacking or by retaliating. So in a sense, the people's life before 2005 and after 2005, there is no big difference. The only difference is that before 2005, Israeli occupied forces stayed there. Now Hamas took over, and Hamas has not heard, has not actually listened to the voice of people. And Hamas itself is also authoritarian. So anybody who went against the will of Hamas, they cannot survive over there. So in a sense, the Hamas, the Gaza occupied and the Gaza controlled by the Hamas is not very different from the Gaza occupied by Israeli forces in terms of freedom and also the liberty. But probably the Palestinians are much happier because they are ruled by their own people. But other than that, actually, there is no significant big differences between before 2005 and after 2005 in terms of poverty level, unemployment. Actually, unemployment level is much higher right now.
All right, I see your point, Professor Park. But one more question on Washington's position over Israel's such post-war Gaza plan. Regarding this plan, the U.S. indicated a different view, with top diplomat Antony Blinken calling for a united and Palestinian-led government for Gaza and the West Bank. How do you see this difference in vision between Israel and the U.S.?
Well, actually, it is very difficult. I don't think Israel would give up on controlling the Gaza for many reasons, but one of the main reasons actually the cited is actually the gas field in front of near the Gaza Strip. But more than the gas, actually Israel likes to control the Gaza in order to totally control the whole Palestinian territories. But the United States are very worried about any reoccupation, and I don't think the Israel is that much stupid to think about the reoccupation. Reoccupation means another huge war, a possible huge between Israelis and Palestinians. So I think the reoccupation is not a good idea. What Israeli government is trying to do is to put a very pro-Israeli government. I don't think it is possible, but as pro-Israeli as possible. But I think that there is no way out right now, whether it be one state or two states or three states, the Gaza will remain a big problem in the Palestinian issues for a long, long time to come.
All right, I see your point, Professor Park. Well, Professor Walker, meanwhile, a senior Hamas official described North Korea as an allied state and that it is welcoming to join forces to launch attacks on the U.S. together. How do you see the possibility of the regime being part of such attacks, though?
I mean, I don't think anybody really realistically thinks that's going to happen. It is true that Hamas has no way to directly get back at the United States. And so that someone who's nominally associated with them or affiliated with them, North Korea, could hypothetically damage the United States, but I just simply can't really fathom that being a realistic option. I know North Korea there are some of the weapons inside Gaza were ultimately sourced in North Korea. They're allied in some sense, but I think that's like a lot of the rhetoric you've seen from whether it's Hamas, whether it's from Hezbollah, a lot of rhetoric, and you don't really see, to this point, a lot behind the rhetoric. They're we're gonna come at you, come at Israel, come at the United States with all the fury we have, but in the end, that's not happening.
Right.
I don't think that North Korea is anywhere close to doing something like that. So.
All right. So it is not likely that North Korea would take part in directly in such a war. I understand. Now, Professor Park, yes. Professor Park, we cannot leave out the chance for Iran to take action against Israel as well, as it already accused Tel Aviv of crossing a red line. Now, what are the chances of Iran taking action against Israel, and would that inevitably lead to another Arab-Israel war?
Well, frankly speaking, from my own perspective, Iran cannot afford another war right now. Actually, Iran can possibly influence so-called pro-Iranian militias or Shia militias in Lebanon and Iraq and Syria, or even in Yemen. But Iran is not that much actually stupid to wage a war against Israel, and it will be detrimental. It will be detrimental to the Iranian economy and the Iranian regime right now. So I don't think that Iran would participate in any war. And also, the United States is very worried about the possible intervention of Iran, and it already sent a signal to the Tehran that if Hezbollah takes part in this Israel-Hamas war, then the United States would consider it as an Iranian declaration of war to United States. So each side are very cautious about any possible move that will trigger another war. And the United States cannot afford another war front right now. They cannot actually make two wars. They cannot win two wars at the same time. United States is not the United States in the 1990s and early 2000s. It's already its power is fragmented. So any country in the Middle East right now doesn't want any war whatsoever. So probably Iran would not get involved. But if the situation is very worsening, for example, the invasion of Gaza is very successful, and Hamas is fatally damaged, then possibly the Hezbollah would intervene on a small scale. But right now, it's very silent, which means, I believe, the Israeli ground invasion of Gaza is not very successful.
All right, I see your point, Professor Park. Well, I'd like to ask many more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Park and Professor Walker, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.